I would argue that the most important building tip in Minecraft is to use the blocks at your disposal as creatively and abstractly as you need. That's sort of ambiguous. So, what do I mean by that? Well, this pumpkin, or any of these pumpkins on the side of my wall, aren't pumpkins. It's the color orange, used to emphasize the decay and the weathering, not caused by the lodestone and grindstone, but the air conditioning unit. And this ladder on the front of the building isn't a ladder. It's a grate. Pretty much you just need to look at these blocks not for their face value, not their in-game purpose, but their color, their shape, their size or texture, or whatever your creativity can bring you. In the past few years, Minecraft has become a lot more recognized as a sort of art medium, like a canvas rather than just a video game. Everything you build in Minecraft is an abstract representation of things in the real world. The same as how a drawing of a waterfall is an abstract representation of a waterfall. And because of this, using blocks not just for their intended purpose opens up the game tenfold. A little bonus sort of sub-tip that falls under the same umbrella is to not be a perfectionist. For an example here, if you have an abstract representation of a fence like this, you need to not worry about the textures not lining up and the floating chain, and just accept that it's not perfect. If you look from this angle, then all of a sudden you have a nice fence. It's the sort of thing that it'll look good from far away, and maybe up close it just doesn't quite look right, but neither does the entirely meter by meter cube buildings. You do just have to accept that this game is composed of meter by meter cubes and nothing you build is ever going to be perfect or realistic. That's why I say abstract. Okay, enough ranting. And here's some quickfire examples of abstract uses of blocks to try to get the ball rolling and get your mind thinking the right way. But first, if you're enjoying the video, leaving a like does go a very long way. And if you want more videos like this, then subscribe. Alright. Let's get on with it. So here's a bunch in my single player let's play, and we'll start off with this enchanting tower. Using levers, chains and pot plants you can create these sort of hanging pots, and I used scaffolding in the windows to create that crisscross pattern that you normally find in windows. Down here at my wood storage I have these piles of wood that are being held down by rails, creating sort of straps that are keeping the wood in place. Inside my town hall here, that is currently doorless because of some zombies, I use an item frame and put a trapdoor inside, and you can create this sort of torch with a little bracket. For this cathedral here, I used a trick with trapdoors and glazed terracotta to create a stained glass window. With these buildings here in this little valley, I used hanging signs and trapdoors to create this really nice railing that looks good from a distance. I also use a little bit of glass just to shape some walls and create a little bit of an archway. Back down here with my colored block storage, I use a decorated pot with a pot in it to create a bigger pot. And to enhance that a bit more, you can even put leaves on top like that to create a little bit of a bigger bush. And if you extend that higher, it can look quite cool. Here in this little village that I have, I intentionally don't replace this dirt because it's the sort of dirt that gets built up in front of steps as people walk across it. So sometimes you can fill in that gap underneath when it seems right, but other times having that little bit of dirt can be really immersive. I also have a little clothesline using chains and banners, which again, it's not perfect because they are floating, but it still gives off the vibe, and that's what matters. In this little well here, I have a cauldron that is my bucket. This here is my moss farm, or at least the building that covers my moss farm, and just on the inside here, I use put out campfires to create sort of bench seating, and I also use them as a supply of logs for the fire. I use a similar technique here. I also use pressure plates as a plate and some plant pots as cups. Since these are barracks, I do have some arrows, and I use this composter that's full to create sort of like the tips of, or the feathers of arrows sticking out. So I've got a barrel of arrows. In here I have a whole bunch of armor stands, and they're kind of broken a little bit since I got the armor stand mod, but the intention was to put items on it like that, and then I have a shelf of helmets, and then I can have a shelf of pants or boots, and that was the idea. And similarly, these are some display cabinets for some armor. Perfect timing, I am completely out of rockets. That is better. This here is my horse stable. Passing the dogs, I have an upstairs interior here where I use beehives as little cabinets. And in this kitchen dining space here, I have activator rails as a stovetop. Okay, moving on from the single player world, this is Manji Kingdoms, which is a server I made with a few mates. And this is my Nevermore Academy inspired castle. And there's a few nifty tricks I used in it. The first one here is the lightning rods as pipes. They're all over the build and they're just some drainage pipes. And then this here is the next one. I used dry coral to line the building to create a really thin trim that's got lots of detail. It was really fun to create a time lapse out of this because when you place it, it's still got its color, so it was just very satisfying. Another one is on the roof here. I have these pot plants, and I think this is like the most creative use of blocks I have. I use pale oak saplings in pots with candles on top, and they create the spires that go all around the build. And if I go a bit of a distance away, you can see it does a pretty effective job at creating some interesting looking spires. And I also use copper grates as windows here. That right there is Creeper Island, an island that I built to cover my creeper farm. And I'll start with the most painful detail on it. These skeleton heads. Had to go through the deep dark to get those, and they create a nice tip for the chimneys. I also use signs and trapdoors to create these shutters, and inside you can see I use a lever here as a sort of cleaver knife, and upstairs here I have leaf litter trimming this carpet to create those sort of frilly carpet edges, and then banners on the edges of windows to create some cool curtains. And I don't really have a specific thing that's going on here, but a whole lot of mechanical nonsense that actually does nothing. This building here is my map room. With the interior, I used scaffolding to create a sort of shelf that you can actually place items on the inside of if you fiddle around with it for a minute. This is my EcoCraft base, and if I can make that, no. This is probably one of my most crazy, overly detailed builds that I have, and I'll go over a few other things on this. One of my favorites here is this little tripwire tap that's kind of leaking and caused a puddle. And right next to it, I've used a beehive as a cardboard box with some chests as some storage. I use levers all around as little supports. They're actually everywhere on this build. And I also have these little cauldron rubbish bins, which you can actually make real by putting a hopper underneath and then like a dispenser into lava. You can throw items in the bin and then the hopper will pick it up and actually dispose of it. Obviously these have dirt underneath. While I head to the shopping district, just take a moment to appreciate the nether hub that Weaselstorm built. And this is my one shop that makes zero profits. And I use some sneaky firefly bushes underneath the blocks because their particles can still travel through. And that's how you get all of these white particles around to create this sort of enchanted cave feel. And then I also make some large mushrooms with these both end rods and pale oak fence posts, and then some just funky blocks on top. Turns out I actually have made sales. Okay, and now in my creative test world, I'll go over a few misfit builds. I made this building in a how to build a fantasy house tutorial video, and there's a couple of things that I wanted to point out on this one, like the spiderweb smoke from the chimney. I use chiseled bookshelves as some windows that obviously you cannot see through. They just create a nice like divided look. And then I also have little stone buttons that are just plopped around randomly that are just little pebbles. This is a bridge I built absolutely ages ago on a different server with some friends, and I used these little guard designs with the candle trident spear thing and observer heads. And I'll go over a few that I haven't actually used yet, but I still think are quite cool. Like the blocks inside of shelves to create an extra layer of detail, and they can work really well for car headlights. This granite hanging from a chain is supposed to be like a cut of meat at a butcher. If I can do it correctly, you can create a barrel of blueberries but you need to make sure to have that water underneath, otherwise it'll go dried. You can create little fruit trees with resin clumps on leaves, just like that, and create a sort of vineyard out of those. Over here in testing, I have a cart that has tipped over that had wood in it, and I used rails on trapdoors and some on the ground there to create the wheels. And this one's tipped out some wheat. You can use azalea bushes with azalea leaves or even moss blocks to create these little azalea bushes. If you put a cactus in a pot like that and then put some leaves on top, you can create some nicely groomed sort of indoor pot plants. A crafting table has a nice grid pattern that you can create a chessboard out of, and using some candles just like that. This is a bit of an odd one, but for some reason kelp just looks a lot like a trash bag, so you can put that by some bins in some like more modern builds. You can put signs in the ground like that and they'll stick up above the block next to it, and you can actually place carpets on top. If I stack that, you can create really easy road lines that are as thin as you can possibly get them. So that is all I've got. I hope that I could inspire you and get you kind of thinking in that builder's mindset. If you're super dedicated, you can scroll through the creative menu and just think of, how could I use that block differently? Alrighty then, like and subscribe and whatnot. Bye-bye.